Captain James adjusted his collar, the polished silver of his diplomatic badge catching the alien sun's greenish glare. The Baron's estate loomed ahead, a chaotic architectural monstrosity that seemed designed to confuse rather than impress. Ornate spires jutted into the sky, while glowing, gelatinous sculptures pulsated randomly along the path. James muttered under his breath, "Who designs these places? Someone with no sense of feng shui, that's for sure." A towering servant ushered him inside. The Baron sat on a throne made of what looked suspiciously like giant fossilized teeth. His wide, bulbous head twitched as James approached, a thin smile spreading across his face. "Ah, the human representative," the Baron drawled, his voice oozing with condescension. "I have a gift for you, a token of goodwill between our peoples." James blinked. He hadn't been briefed about gifts. "That's very kind of you, Baron. Bring her in," the Baron barked, cutting him off. Two guards wheeled in a sleek hoverchair carrying a young alien woman. Her delicate features bore a faint resemblance to the Baron's, though her sharp, slitted eyes were nothing like his bulbous ones. She was striking, but the Baron's sneer made it clear he didn't think so. "This," the Baron announced with mock grandeur, "is my daughter, Lyra. She's yours now. A perfect match for your species, no?" The room fell silent. James's diplomatic training fought a losing battle against his natural instinct to gape. His mind scrambled for a response that wouldn't cause an interstellar incident. Lyra broke the tension. "Oh, great. Another primate to babysit," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Her words startled James, but the corners of his mouth twitched in amusement. James began cautiously. "Thank you for this unexpected honor." The Baron's expression soured. He'd expected outrage, humiliation, anything but James's calm acceptance. Lyra's smirk grew wider. "Well," the Baron snapped, clearly annoyed, "she's your problem now." As they left the estate, the hoverchair sputtered, emitting a high-pitched whine before lurching forward like a drunken bird. James instinctively reached out to steady it, only for Lyra to swat his hand away. "I don't need your help, monkey boy," she snapped. "Noted," James said, suppressing a grin. The hoverchair wobbled again, slamming into one of the estate's decorative sculptures. The gelatinous blob jiggled violently before collapsing in on itself, releasing an odor that could only be described as burnt licorice mixed with despair. Lyra wrinkled her nose, muttering something in her alien tongue that James guessed wasn't polite. Once aboard his ship, James sighed in relief. "Welcome aboard," he said, turning to Lyra. "Let's start over. I'm Captain James." "I don't care," Lyra interrupted, her sharp gaze cutting through him. "This isn't a goodwill gesture. It's a political ploy and you know it. So let's skip the pleasantries." James raised an eyebrow. "Fair enough. But for the record, I didn't exactly ask for a gift." Lyra's laugh was humorless. "Gift? Please. I'm the galactic equivalent of a re-gifted fruitcake. My father just handed me over like I was spare cargo. That's his idea of diplomacy." James found himself impressed by her bluntness. He grabbed a chair and sat across from her, observing her carefully. Her expression was defiant, but there was a spark of something else, intelligence, perhaps? A dry humor? He decided to test it. "You know," he said, leaning back, "humans have a saying, it's the thought that counts." Lyra snorted. "And this was a thoughtless move." James chuckled. "Touché. But seriously, why go along with it? You don't strike me as the obedient type." She shrugged. "What choice do I have? Refuse and get locked in a tower? At least here, I can see what all the fuss is about with you humans. Plus," she added with a sly grin, "you seem amusingly incompetent." James pretended to be offended. "I'll have you know I'm very competent at being incompetent." For the first time, Lyra laughed, a genuine sound that caught even her by surprise. James decided he liked that laugh. Maybe this bizarre arrangement wasn't entirely hopeless. Dinner that evening was a comedy of errors. Lyra stared in disbelief as James attempted to use a pair of alien utensils that looked like tongs but functioned like chopsticks. He dropped a slippery, glowing orb onto the table, where it rolled and bumped against Lyra's plate. "Impressive," she said dryly. "You've mastered intergalactic clumsiness." "I'm a quick learner," James retorted, jabbing at another orb and sending it flying into his lap.
He winced.
"Okay, maybe not that quick." Lyra shook her head, but her lips twitched in a reluctant smile. James noticed it and grinned triumphantly.
"See?
"I'm growing on you already." "Like a fungus," she muttered, but there was no venom in her tone. By the end of the meal, James felt oddly at ease with Lyra. She was sharp, sarcastic, and unapologetically herself, a far cry from the docile gift the Baron had likely intended. When she retired to her quarters, he found himself looking forward to their next interaction. For the first time in his diplomatic career, James wondered if the most valuable negotiation wasn't with the Baron, but with his unexpected companion. The next morning, James found Lyra in the ship's observation lounge, her hoverchair parked near the viewport. She stared out at the swirling colors of a nearby nebula, her expression unreadable. He approached cautiously, holding 2 steaming cups of what approximated alien tea. "Thought you might want this," he offered. She glanced at the cup, but didn't take it.
"Tea?"
"That's the grand human solution to everything, isn't it?" "Not everything," James said, sitting across from her. "We also have coffee, but that's reserved for emergencies." A flicker of amusement crossed her face, but she ignored the cup. "What do you want, Captain?" James leaned back, studying her. "I was wondering why you're so determined to act like you don't care about anything." "Because I don't buy it." Her sharp gaze snapped to his, but instead of a cutting remark, she sighed. "Do you know what it's like to be seen as nothing more than a symbol of failure? My father never cared about me, only about how much of an embarrassment I am to his precious reputation." James nodded slowly. "So you decided to own it. Turn his narrative into armor." "Exactly," she said, her tone a mixture of defiance and weariness. "It's easier than hoping for something better." James hesitated, then leaned forward. "What if I told you I saw something better? That you're sharper than half the people I've met in this line of work, and probably smarter than the rest." Lyra arched an eyebrow. "Flattery, Captain? I didn't think humans were so transparent." "Not flattery," he said, his voice firm. "Just the truth." For a moment, Lyra said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, she smirked. "All right, Captain. Impress me." James retrieved a portable console from his pocket, setting it on the table between them. "The negotiation terms from yesterday," he explained. "Take a look and tell me what you see." Lyra rolled her eyes but leaned closer. Her slitted pupils flicked over the text, and within moments, her expression sharpened. "This clause here, cooperative asset reassignment, it's a trap." James frowned. "Go on." She pointed to a section further down. "They've structured it to appear mutually beneficial, but in practice, it allows them to reallocate critical resources without consulting you. If you agree to this, you'll end up dependent on their supply chains within months." James stared at her, impressed. "That's alarmingly accurate." "Of course it is," Lyra said with a smug grin. "You humans might be good at improvisation, but subtlety clearly isn't your strong suit." He couldn't help but laugh. "Fair point. So, what's the fix?" Lyra leaned back, her fingers tapping thoughtfully against the arm of her chair. "Rewrite the clause to specify equal oversight from both parties. And include a provision for third-party arbitration in case of disputes. That way, they can't manipulate the terms without exposing themselves." James nodded, quickly making notes. "Anything else?" "Yes," she said with mock seriousness. "Stop trusting people who smile too much. It's unsettling." Later that day, James incorporated Lyra's suggestions into his briefing, marveling at her insight. He was still mulling over the adjustments when Lyra found him in the common area, holding what appeared to be a human comedy holovid in her hands. "I was curious," she said, holding up the disc. "This Monty Python, is it a war documentary?" James choked on his drink, laughing. "Not even close." They spent the evening watching the holovid, with James struggling to explain the absurdities of human humor while Lyra's deadpan reactions nearly had him in tears. At one point, she paused the video to ask, Are all human mating rituals this bizarre?
What?
James asked, startled. This scene, she clarified, pointing to a skit. The dancing, the absurd innuendo, it's clearly a courtship display, yes? James tried and failed to suppress his laughter.
No, it's
Okay, maybe. But definitely not a serious one. Lyra didn't look convinced. Humans are strange. Coming from someone whose culture involves competitive chair dueling as a rite of passage, he teased, earning a rare laugh from her. The next day, their budding partnership was put to the test. A rival diplomat from another alien faction, a slick-talking creature named Harn, challenged James's amended terms. Lyra watched silently from the corner of the negotiation chamber as James struggled to counter Harn's manipulative rhetoric. Finally, she cleared her throat. Captain, permission to speak? James hesitated but nodded. Go ahead. Lyra wheeled forward, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. Ambassador Harn, your objections are fascinating. Truly. But if you could explain how mutual cooperation includes unilateral resource diversion, I'm sure we'd all be enlightened. Harn blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Well, that is to say… Exactly, Lyra interrupted smoothly. Your clause is a linguistic pretzel, designed to confuse rather than clarify. Perhaps you'd care to propose something more transparent. The room fell silent. Harn sputtered for a moment before retreating with a mumbled excuse. James gave Lyra a grateful look. As they left the chamber, he said, "Remind me to bring you to every negotiation from now on." Lyra smirked. "As long as you keep the tea coming, Captain." James couldn't help but laugh. For the first time in days, he felt like he might actually come out of this mission in one piece, and he had Lyra to thank for it. The Baron's holographic image loomed over the ship's central chamber, his smug expression as insufferable as ever. James folded his arms, keeping his tone measured. "To what do we owe the honor, Baron?" The Baron sneered. "I've heard disturbing rumors, Captain. It seems you've been parading my daughter as some sort of political weapon. Such behavior is unbecoming of your species." Lyra, seated beside James, gave a dramatic sigh. "Oh no, Father. How dare I have opinions and use them? What a disgrace." The Baron's glare turned icy. "You should remember your place, Lyra. You are a gift, not a participant." "Good thing I stopped caring about your opinions years ago," she retorted, her voice as sharp as a blade. "James might actually value what I have to say, unlike you." The Baron's expression twisted into something between rage and disbelief. James stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "Baron, Lyra has been an invaluable ally. If anything, her insights have strengthened our negotiations. If you're implying she's incapable of contributing, you're underestimating her." The Baron's laugh was cold and hollow. "You're bold, human, but naive. That creature is nothing but a broken relic. You're fooling yourself if you think she's anything more." Lyra's face remained impassive, but James could see the tension in her shoulders. Without thinking, he spoke, his voice sharper than he intended. "Funny, Baron. For someone so obsessed with power, you seem blind to the greatest resource you have." The Baron's hologram flickered, his mouth opening to retort, but James cut the transmission before he could speak. He turned to Lyra, who was staring at him with an unreadable expression. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," James replied. "Because he's wrong. And you deserve better." Lyra looked away, her usual sarcasm absent. "Don't make a habit of defending me. It's exhausting." The moment passed, and soon they were back in the negotiation chamber, preparing for the next round of talks. The opposing faction's lead negotiator, a sly, amphibious alien named Jorek, smiled as James and Lyra entered. The human and his advisor," Jorek said, his tone dripping with condescension. "A peculiar arrangement, but I suppose every species has its quirks." James smiled politely. "We find that diverse perspectives lead to better outcomes." Lyra chimed in with a wry smile. "And some perspectives are better when they're not stuck in the last century. Isn't that right, Jorek?" The amphibian's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Indeed. Shall we begin?" The discussion quickly became heated, with Jork attempting to undercut every proposal James put forward. Lyra, sitting silently beside him, observed the exchanges with keen interest. Finally, as Jork launched into a particularly convoluted argument, Lyra leaned forward. "Excuse me," she interrupted, her tone polite but firm. "But your logic seems inconsistent. If resource sharing is so crucial, why does your proposal prioritize unilateral distribution?" Jork blinked, caught off guard. "Well, it's simply a matter of logistics." "Logistics?" Lyra interrupted, feigning confusion.
Yes.
"The ancient art of I get everything and you get nothing. A fascinating approach, but hardly equitable." James bit back a grin as the room fell silent. Jork sputtered, clearly unprepared for her sharp wit. "Perhaps," Lyra continued, her tone calm and measured, "we should revisit the core principles of mutual benefit. Unless, of course, you're more interested in preserving the status quo than achieving progress." Jork's gaze darted between Lyra and James, his confidence visibly shaken. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Very well. Let's proceed." After the session ended, James turned to Lyra, his admiration evident. "That was impressive." She shrugged, though a faint smile tugged at her lips. "It's not hard to outwit someone when they think you're irrelevant." James laughed. "Still, you have a way of cutting through the nonsense. I could learn a thing or two from you." Lyra gave him a sidelong glance. "Careful, Captain. Flattery will get you everywhere." Their camaraderie deepened as the negotiations progressed, but tensions escalated when the Baron unexpectedly arrived in person. His towering form filled the chamber, his presence commanding attention. He wasted no time confronting James and Lyra. "I've had enough of this farce," the Baron declared. "You're meddling in matters beyond your comprehension." Lyra's voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. "You're just upset because I'm proving you wrong," the Baron sneered. "You've done nothing but embarrass yourself." James stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "On the contrary, Baron, Lyra has been instrumental in these talks. If anyone here is embarrassed, it should be you for underestimating her." The Baron's gaze darkened, but before he could respond, Jork interjected. "If I may, perhaps we should focus on the negotiations at hand rather than personal grievances." The Baron glared at Jork, but reluctantly stepped back. The discussion resumed, with Lyra continuing to outmaneuver the opposition at every turn. Her insights were sharp, her arguments compelling, and her confidence undeniable. By the end of the session, it was clear that James and Lyra had gained the upper hand. As the delegation dispersed, the Baron lingered, his expression unreadable. "You think you've won," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But you've only delayed the inevitable." Lyra met his gaze, her tone defiant. "Maybe. But at least I'm not afraid to try." The Baron said nothing more, turning and leaving without another word. James watched him go, then turned to Lyra. "That was brave." She shrugged. "Someone had to say it." James smiled, his admiration for her growing with each passing moment. For all her sarcasm and wit, Lyra was far more than the Baron's gift. She was a force to be reckoned with, and he was proud to stand by her side. The final negotiations were underway, and the room buzzed with tension. Representatives from multiple factions filled the chamber, their expressions varying from wary to outright hostile. James sat at the head of the table, with Lyra beside him, her presence a silent but potent reminder of the stakes. The Baron loomed in the corner, his disapproval palpable, but for once, he remained silent. Jork, ever the opportunist, was the first to speak. "Captain James, while we appreciate your efforts, the proposal still favors your species disproportionately. Surely you can see why that's unacceptable." James opened his mouth to reply, but Lyra cut him off, her voice calm and precise. "Unacceptable? Ambassador Jork, perhaps you've forgotten that the original terms were skewed entirely in your favor. If anyone should be questioning fairness, it's us." Jork's amphibious features twisted in annoyance. "With all due respect, young lady, this is a matter of galactic trade, not personal grievances." "Exactly," Lyra replied smoothly. Which is why we should prioritize transparency and balance. Your attempt to mask inequity under layers of bureaucracy isn't clever, it's desperate. A few representatives chuckled, and Jorik's annoyance deepened. The Baron shifted uncomfortably, clearly displeased by the attention his daughter was receiving. James, meanwhile, struggled to hide his grin. Lyra was relentless, and it was glorious to watch. As the discussion continued, Lyra's insights turned the tide in their favor. She exposed flaws in the opposing factions' arguments, proposed elegant compromises, and dismantled Jorik's manipulations with ease. Each point she made was met with murmurs of approval from the other representatives, and even the Baron couldn't completely mask his surprise. By the time the meeting adjourned, it was clear who had won. The factions reluctantly agreed to the revised terms, and James could feel the weight of victory settling over him. As the representatives filed out, he turned to Lyra, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You were incredible." She shrugged, but there was a faint smile on her lips. "It's easy to win when your opponents are so predictable." James laughed. "Don't sell yourself short. You've got a talent for this." Their moment was interrupted by the Baron, who approached them with a thunderous expression. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've accomplished something, but all you've done is embarrass me." Lyra met his gaze without flinching. "You embarrassed yourself the moment you thought giving me away would humiliate someone else." The Baron's eyes narrowed, but before he could reply, James stepped between them. "Baron, with all due respect, you should be proud of your daughter. She's proven herself more capable than most people in this room, and certainly more than you gave her credit for." The Baron sneered. "You humans and your sentimentality. It will be your downfall." Without waiting for a response, he turned and stormed out of the chamber. James exhaled, shaking his head. "Charming as always." Lyra snorted. "That went better than I expected." James turned to her, his expression serious. "You didn't have to do all of this, you know. But I'm glad you did." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Is this the part where you thank me and make an awkward speech about teamwork?" "No," James said, his tone light. "This is the part where I ask if you consider staying on as my advisor. Permanently." Lyra blinked, clearly caught off guard. "You're serious?" "Completely," James replied. "You're brilliant, Lyra. And you've proven that you're more than capable of handling these negotiations. I can't think of anyone better to have by my side." For a moment, Lyra didn't say anything. Then, slowly, she smiled, a genuine, warm smile that James hadn't seen before. "You know what, Captain? I think I'll take you up on that." James grinned. "Welcome aboard." As they left the chamber, Lyra glanced at him, her smirk returning. "But if you ever make me watch another one of those comedies, I'm resigning immediately." James laughed.
Deal.
Their partnership had been born out of the Baron's cruelty, but it had grown into something neither of them could have predicted. Together, they had defied expectations, outmaneuvered their opponents, and proven that even the most unlikely alliances could change the galaxy. And for the first time in a long time, James felt like the future was bright.